other day of your life. And that's what we got here. And I think it's pretty clean and cut, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Hawkins. Are there questions for Representative Hawkins? Representative Pohanka.
Chairman and Representative Hawkins. So currently, like on some college campuses, there are signs up that say, as far as no weapons, like the gym, fine arts, what do I have down here? Recreation or the dorms. So I'm guessing those will still not, a person will still not be able to bring a sidearm into those facilities.
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Pohanka, yes, this legislation doesn't affect any changes for universities' policies. All of that is firm in the policy here. We haven't reached and changed any of that.
Representative Hostetler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to send House Bill 376 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you, Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hawkins. So just to use another example here, if I show up at the local fairgrounds and there's a home and garden show, and I've normally got my sidearm with me, I'm okay walking in there. Is that right?
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Alfieri, that is correct. Anywhere where we normally carry and it's open to the public and we habitually use these areas and we conceal carry, that nothing changes.
Representative Holtzclaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just got a question. Yeah, so I go pick up my son from elementary school, and I walk in, I'm carrying, grab him, and I come back to my car, and we take off. Did I break the law?
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we want that on camera, but potentially.
I didn't do it. I was my son's 23 years old, so.
So no Rule 80 declaration here today?
No, sir, not today.
All right. Representative Achilles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hawkins, so your description of this bill and reading through it, it feels like we're reversing the 2023 decision of Herndon versus the city of Sandpoint. And I can't remember the bill number, but I know we had one last year which basically codified that court decision. So are we rolling that back with this bill?
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Achilles, what is occurring in this is when that case came forward, Idaho had a lack of statute and codes for them to deliberate on, and they reached back into common law to come up with their determination. And since then, we've been slowly stepping forward as a state of Idaho and curing these. This is the last cure to that issue.
Follow-up? A follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I remember the bill correctly, it basically said that if there's a private event in a public park, that private event has the right to put up a sign that says there's no weapons allowed at the event. So does this bill eliminate that right of the folks holding that private event?
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Achilles, I don't think that was the determinate language, but I don't have that case in front of me. What I believe you're referring to is there was a delegated right of an anticipation of a personal property right that they got from common law. The Second Amendment, a lot like the First Amendment, if you rent a park to have your wedding and somebody wants to come and protest, there is nothing you can do to stop the free speech of people. There's nothing you can do to interfere with the First Amendment. The Second Amendment is the same in the state of Idaho.
Just Representative Achilles, I do have signed up to testify today, Scott Herndon. So I don't know. I mean, you're welcome to keep asking him, but if you want to ask Scott these questions as well, since he was a party in that case, that might be beneficial. Any further questions for Representative Hawkins? Representative Mickelson.
Representative Hawkins and Mr. Chairman. So if you have bleachers where the public normally goes, say a Friday Night Lights football game, is the school, because we have gun-free zones at the school, are you then saying that they have to be allowed to carry guns?
Representative Hawkins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mickelson, this legislation does not affect current school policies or those codes that are already written in the state of Idaho. So no, they would not have to on those school grounds.
Any further questions? Seeing none, there's no one signed up to testify in person. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to testify on House Bill 376 in the audience today? Seeing none, the only person I've signed up to testify is Mr. Herndon, so we will connect him virtually. You there, Mr. Herndon?
And Mr.
Good morning.
Chairman, I am here.
All right. Go ahead, state your name, who you represent. You have 2 minutes today for public testimony.
Okay, my name is Scott Herndon. I am from Sagal, Idaho. I represent myself. I am in support of House Bill 376. I'll give a little background on the bill. There were questions from the committee about last year's bill. That was Senate Bill 1374. And in consideration under House Bill 376 in subsection 25 of 183302 is private property was the main subject of subsection 25. In the Herndon versus Sandpoint case, the Supreme Court of Idaho said that public property, meaning government-owned property that gets rented, permitted, leased, or contracted to private groups, is allowed to have restrictions for gun carry as if it is private property. So in Senate Bill 1374 last year, we clawed most of that back and we left 3 exceptions, and that was for ticketed commercial events, events by invitation only, and events that have clearly restricted access to a reasonable person. House Bill 376 basically deals with those 3 scenarios. We go ahead and remove those 3 scenarios. And the result of House Bill 376 is that if it passes, then all public property, all government-owned property that is normally and habitually open to the public on which you can currently carry a firearm will always be able to carry a firearm. Questions have come up about schools and about universities, and that's covered on line 24 of the last page of the bill. Page 8, we included last year in Senate Bill 1374 that we're not going to impact 183302C or 183309. 183302C includes schools, so whatever the legislative policy is and the statutory policy is on schools will remain intact. And 183309 covers universities and colleges, and that will remain intact as well. And you can read those code sections separately. And with that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Herndon. Are there questions today for Mr. Herndon? Representative Achilles, did you have any after? Are you good? Okay. Representative Skog.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I have a question. We have what is called the Ford Idaho Center in my town, and they lease out to a private company to run all their events. So we own the property. We don't run the events. We let them do their thing. I am told that this bill will not affect their ability with their people that they lease to prevent firearms if they want to. Do you know the situation, and is that really the case?
Mr. Herndon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Skog, I actually talked to the mayor of Nampa, and I also talked to the general manager at the Ford Idaho Center to understand exactly what the situation is at the Ford Idaho Center. The Ford Idaho Center, though owned by the government, is never normally and habitually open to the public. Every single event that happens there is under contract, has licensing agreements and insurance requirements, even the horse shows that are held outdoors. So the expectation for House Bill 376, just like the expectation when we passed Senate Bill 1374 last year, is that the Ford Idaho Center is not normally and habitually open to the public, and they will carry on business as usual. And so all of their artists and the events that they have there, gun carry restrictions can continue to remain in place at the Ford Idaho Center, and this will not change that.
Representative Achilles has a question for you, Mr. Herndon. Representative Achilles.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herndon, so if I understand your explanation here, we're effectively overturning the 2023 decision of Herndon versus the city of Sandpoint from the state Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Mr. Herndon.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles, that actually depends. We are definitely superseding the court's opinion in Herndon versus Sandpoint on certain property. And in this case, it would be public property that's normally and habitually open to the public. So it would depend on whether War Memorial Field in Sandpoint is normally and habitually open to the public. I'm not sure that War Memorial Field is. I know the adjacent park is, but War Memorial Field is usually held for sporting events only. So it would depend on how that property is actually used and if anybody can normally access that park normally and habitually while carrying a firearm, then that would remain the case.
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Herndon, let me just
Hey,
take a couple,
Crane, put
couple steps
Herndon's
back
face
here.
on there. What are you
why
doing?
Is this a
Kind of
public policy
censoring
problem
him?
that we need to solve?
Mr. Herndon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles. The main goal here is that the First Amendment guarantees the right of free speech in public parks, city sidewalks, and that's the areas that we're targeting with this bill. And it doesn't matter whether those places get rented, you always have the right of free speech, but the right to carry is sort of the ugly sister of the First Amendment, and as it is treated by law. What I would like to accomplish and seen accomplished in House Bill 376 is just what we have in place in 1833-02C.
By the way,
used as an example,
Skog said
courthouses.
that
So courthouses are a place
this
where
is
you can
a
never
Herndon's
carry
a senator.
firearm, according to
No,
Idaho
he's not. He
statute.
got
So
kicked out.
No matter what's happening at a courthouse,
Last
Idahoans
election.
can know with predictability that they do not have gun carry rights at a courthouse. I would like to accomplish the same thing in House Bill 376 for all public property that's normally and habitually open. Rather than having a patchwork of regulations related to firearm carry where gun owners who can normally go into a park one day and carry with their firearm, the next day there may be restrictions. I would like there to be absolute certainty as to where gun owners can carry, and House Bill 376 will provide that to Idaho's gun owners.
Any further questions for Mr. Herndon? Representative Crane, 12.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Herndon. I'm sorry I didn't hear the full answer on Representative Skog's question, so I just want to read a couple of things, and maybe you can answer this directly. But I'm looking here at the City of Nampa's website, and it says that the Ford Idaho Center is a multi-purpose facility in Nampa that consists of 3 primary venues: the Ford Arena, the Ford Amphitheater, the Ford Sports Center Horse Park, as a facility owned by the City of Nampa. And then it goes on. If you go to the Ford Idaho Center's website and you go down to items that are prohibited, it does say based on, in general, per standing event request, the following items are prohibited at the Ford Idaho Center, and the first item listed is weapons. So could you answer, based on what I just read, how this applies to the Ford Idaho Center?
Mr. Herndon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Crane. Your answer is that the Ford Idaho Center is not normally and habitually open to the public. Every single event there in any of its venues, whether indoor or outdoors, is a public person cannot just show up and use those areas. Every single event is contracted as if they are private events or permitted events. Every single event has a contract, a licensing agreement, and insurance requirements. So an example would be they hold horse shows there, but those horse shows all have a contract to occur, and I cannot just ride my horse openly onto that property at any time. So the difference with the Ford Idaho Center is in the key words that are in the bill in subsection 25, and this is on page 8, line 5, that the Ford Idaho Center is not normally and habitually open to the public. It's actually only open to licensed and contracted and permitted events with insurance requirements. And therefore, the Ford Idaho Center will not have to change any of its rules nor change any of the ways that it does business as relates to firearm restrictions.
Great. Thank you for answering that.
Representative Mickelson.
Mr. Herndon and good Chairman, so if our city parks decide that they're going to be weapon-free zones, then they're habitually closed to weapons, so then they wouldn't have to have weapons in the park? Am I understanding that right?
Mr. Herndon.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Mickelson, so the reason that we have statewide firearm preemption laws, which this is part of it, is that we don't want cities to have different regulations and a patchwork of regulations from city to city. So that's why we've essentially claimed the field of firearm carry restrictions at the state level, and only the legislature gets to regulate where firearms are carried. And right now in a city park, firearms are allowed to be carried under Idaho statute, and so a city could never actually restrict that under other areas of firearm law in Idaho code.
Follow-up question, Mr.
Certainly.
Chairman. So if I understand this correctly, if we have a city that then has a facility or an event center like the hockey center or something like that, and somebody rents it out for a private event, most of the time it's open to the public, kids go play hockey in it, and they have a private event and they say they don't want to have firearms at this event, then this bill basically requires them to allow people to carry a firearm?
Mr. Herndon.
So this would be a classic example where it would depend on whether that facility is normally and habitually open to the public. And I'll give one example here in the city of Sandpoint. There's a community center that's right downtown on First Avenue. It is not normally and habitually open to the public, so an event could probably be held there. And since the event is not normally since the venue is not normally and habitually open to the public, then you probably could have firearm restrictions in that case if a private organizer were renting that space.
Follow up?
Sure.
I don't see a definition for normally and habitually in this, and so I'm wondering if you could tell us where we would find that definition of normally and habitually?
Mr. Herndon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Mickelson, I did a lot of research on that. The original language for normally and habitually was provided by LSO last year when we did Senate Bill 1374. And we did a lot of research from case law. And normally and habitually is actually well understood by the courts as to how to interpret and define that. What we did not want to do last year with Senate Bill 1374 is narrow the definition unnecessarily. That's why we also used a reasonable person standard when we passed Senate Bill 1374 last year, because we're essentially depending on the legal definitions for normally and habitually that have been developed over literally hundreds of years of case law here in the United States. And we did not want to alter those understandings and constrain the legislation more than we intended.
Representative Keeley's.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herndon, so, I'm not a legal scholar, so maybe you can just help me out here on what's normally and habitually. So is that 2 hours a week, 20 hours a week? How would we objectively arrive at a definition of normally, habitually that maybe you and I would be able to agree on?
Mr. Herndon, don't let him fool you. He plays a lawyer on state affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Achilles. And I should say, I am also not a lawyer nor a legal scholar. I've read a lot of laws and a lot of case law, but that doesn't make me an expert. Normally refers to something that occurs under normal conditions or circumstances, which implies a standard or expected state of affairs. Habitually means something that is done by habit in a habitual manner, indicating a practice that has been established through repetition. So I would argue that normally and habitually is definitely going to be interpreted to apply to city streets, what are called the traditional public forums, and public parks, which are what are called the quintessential public forums. And if you have any sort of city or government-owned property that is not normally open to the public, then I would say that's where you're gonna continue to have potential gun restrictions. Another great example is City of Sandpoint owns property that has a long-term lease to Lighthouse Foods that very clearly is not normally and habitually open to the public. So over time, if there were challenges, we're going to find out how the courts interpret that. But those are the definitions that essentially come from case law and are cited in multiple cases in the state of Idaho and in the federal courts. And I assume that's the definitions that the courts are going to arrive at.
Any further questions for Mr. Herndon? Mr. Herndon, thank you very much for your testimony today. Committee, that's all I have signed up to testify. There was no negative testimony, so Representative Hawkins, you no need to wrap up. We do have a motion by Representative Hostetler to send House Bill 376 to the floor with the due pass recommendation. Is there discussion on that motion? Representative Keeley's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple comments on the motion here. So, this is really interesting to me because I thought Mr. Herndon's bill last session was a good one. It codified that Supreme Court decision and it removed ambiguity for events in public parks. I'm disappointed to see this because I think we're unwinding what was good legislation before. Now we're saying an event in a public park or at a public venue, whatever, community sports facility, that they can no longer have some confidence about, are there weapons at their events? And if somebody's holding a private event in a public park, they've got every right to determine if there's weapons allowed or not allowed at that event. And now we're rolling this back and we're creating a whole new level of ambiguity here. I don't think the city's like this. I don't like this. And I think this is not, we don't have a public problem here to solve. We're in fact creating more problems by reinserting ambiguity into the rules around this. And for those reasons, I'll be a no on this, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Achilles. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the motion is to send House Bill 376 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It will be done. Would you like to be recorded as voting no? Representative Shubin and Representative Achilles on the record voting no. The committee will now